If your vehicle breaks down on the day to work, you call a tow truck. If your ambulance breaks down on the way to the hospital, the survivors call a lawyer. So it's a huge responsibility that I took very seriously. When people ask me about how you stay in business for 37 years, I have one standard answer.
Meet Kevin Roberts, the president of Roberts Repair Inc., where he has spent 37 years growing a one-man shop into a multi-specialty operation, serving everything from lawn tractors to semi-trucks, with a focus on emergency vehicles and classic cars. Kevin trains technicians nationwide on diagnostic strategy and critical thinking.
We solved the pollution problem 25 years ago until we got to the point that we started labeling carbon dioxide as a pollutant, which it's not. That's the main problem. We were making a whole generation of people fragile. What we need are people that can...
We do ourselves a disservice because most of us hire out of desperation. Oh, I can't find a good mechanic. I can't find a good guy. So I hire the first guy who walks in the door that has the technical skills I need.
The three things that you need to address is
Welcome to Beyond the Bay. I'm your host, Peter Cooper, and today our guest, Kevin Roberts with Roberts Repair. Kevin, thanks for being on today.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your operation, because I know that you've got quite a years of experience in this industry. Tell me a little bit about your shop.
I've owned and operated Roberts Repair Inc. for 37 years. I started out as a small one bay, one guy shop, and then a few years in, I hired my first employee, and then about 8 years in, I ended up selling the property, buying a new shop, moving into it, building a house next door. And so I'm in a rural shop. My property has both a house and a shop on it. I've just gradually expanded and specialized in things, even though I'm still just a general shop. We do everything from lawn tractors to semi-tractors. Right now, we have about 2 specialties, which are emergency vehicles and classic cars. But we still see just about everything that comes into the shop.
Tell me a little bit about the emergency vehicle thing, because I've actually interviewed some people that do that, and it's kind of a unique area. How did you get into working on emergency vehicles?
When I first started business, I worked back and forth with a guy that operated tow trucks, and we just helped each other out. And he knows everybody in town. So when the local county ambulance service decided that they needed somebody to work on their vehicles and the Ford dealership turned them down, he said to call me, so they called me. And I said, sure, I'd love to, and then started putting out feelers. If I'm going to work on something as important as an ambulance, I need to really know what I'm doing. So I started attending training conferences, and at one of the shows at one of the training conferences, I met a guy named Steve Wild, who was the president of the Emergency Vehicle Technician Certification Commission. The EVTCC is the organization that writes the certification tests if you want to be certified to work on an ambulance or a fire truck or an airport rescue or something like that. And so I thought, well, this is cool. And at the same time, I started getting my ASEs. So I got my ASE, Master Car, Master Truck, L1, L2. And then I got Master EVT, which once you get master level in the emergency vehicle field, you will be invited to the validation conference, which is a yearly occurrence where we get about 100 volunteers that come together. We split them up into committees, and they work on all of what now has become 22 tests. So it's an interesting field because obviously the stakes are very high. If your vehicle breaks down on the day to work, you call a tow truck. If your ambulance breaks down on the way to the hospital, the survivors call a lawyer. So it's a huge responsibility that I took very seriously. And when people ask me about how you stay in business for 37 years, I have one standard answer. It's mostly luck. And a lot of times they laugh when they hear that, but I'm totally serious. I had the good fortune of getting as I expanded into different ambulance fleets, one of my customers said, let's work together. Let's come up with a program to make these $250,000 ambulances last as long as possible, which is what we did. And they improved their life cycle and I didn't find out this till years later when he was introducing me to his new boss, that he said, before we started developing this maintenance program, our life cycle was 180,000. Now it's 360,000. And we have since upped that to about 500 50,000 miles life cycle on a new ambulance. We have one in the shop right now that's got 480 on it. And in that time, any ambulance that I've ever serviced from new has never gotten a new engine. Well, no, that's not true. There was one in 2012 that got a new engine before 500,000 miles. So because of his input and working together, we were able to develop a maintenance program that really allowed the vehicles to last. We modified fluid change intervals without dramatically increasing pricing, and did just a lot of little things. We put certain parts on a maintenance schedule for replacement instead of waiting till they break. Because when you start running 500,000 miles on an ambulance, you know exactly how long every part's going to last. So I had the good fortune of being able to work with a guy like that.
Yeah, and I think that's something too that we don't talk about in this industry is life cycles of parts, especially in medium and light duty. And, if we treated automobiles the same way we treated airplanes, we wouldn't have 90% of the problems we have. And I think I almost want to blame manufacturers a little bit too, because they really want to stretch out these oil change intervals. I mean, we're past 30,000 miles on a 15-liter Cummins now for an oil change.
Right.
And I think some of these changes are insane, but also, I had a similar experience. I used to work for the city of Des Moines, and we had E450 vans, very similar to a lot of ambulance chassis. And we had a lot of problems with transmissions because, buses are really hard on transmissions. They do a lot of idling. They do a lot of stop and go. And we went to an oil change interval. We would flush the transmissions every 36,000 miles. We never lost another transmission ever again.
Yeah, we do 15. We do a drain and fill at 15, make sure that the drain pan has a plug in it. And we drain about 7 to 9 quarts out of it. We drain it into a graduated bucket. It takes 30 seconds to pull the plug and then just leave it sit till it stops draining, put the plug back in, measure what fluid you took out, put that much back in. And we do that every 15,000 miles. At 30,000 miles, we pull the pan and put a filter in it. And we, in 2024, April of 2024, so that's just 2 years ago, we retired 4 rigs, all of which had over 500,000 miles on it. We had done 0 engines and only 2 transmissions. So yeah, absolutely. Shortening the maintenance intervals. But I'll say one thing about the maintenance intervals. As much as I like blaming OEMs for various things, engineering nightmares and stuff like that, because they're not designed around the technician. They're designed around the profitability of the OEM. But the OEM is the tail, the EPA is the dog. And right now, with all the things that they're using to minimize carbon emissions, because today we don't worship at the altar of low pollution. That was fixed 25 years ago. You took a 2005 full-size car down the highway at 55 miles an hour. If that highway was in Southern California, the air coming out of the tailpipe is cleaner than the air going into the air filter. So we solved the pollution problem 25 years ago until we got to the point that we started labeling carbon dioxide as a pollutant, which it's not. That's the main problem. And the things that we're doing to minimize carbon dioxide are bad for the environment, bad for the life cycle of the vehicle, bad for the customer, but good for the activists that hate carbon dioxide. It's a huge political problem.
Yeah, and we see the same thing with NOx emissions and what it's doing to some of the plant life. When you're burning an ammonia compound to get the nitrates out of it to, interact with the NOx in the SCR system, it's causing a lot of downstream problems with plant life. And, I just read an article about California and how a lot of the trees up in the mountains are dying because, that output of that, essentially it's an acid, is killing the pine trees. And I think there's a lot of things we're finding out that's going on that we didn't really anticipate, and I'd be kind of curious to see how is the emissions affecting emergency vehicles? Because I know that I thought that there was a waiver where they could not have to use DEF, but I wasn't really sure. Like, do you know how that works?
Yes. If you buy a new E450 ambulance, you have 2 ambulance packages. You have the one that includes the posit traction, the 2 alternators if needed, that kind of stuff. But you also have a separate ambulance package that removes the inducements from things like the DEF tank going low, which means an inducement is a way of manipulating the driver to get the vehicle fixed, to take care of it better. And the problem with the inducements is it's a 50-50 problem. Well, it's not exactly 50-50. The driver doesn't want to take care of the system, but the system has sensors in it that have a high failure rate and falsely report emission problems. You see, the mindset of the EPA is that your exhaust system is guilty until proven innocent. If a sensor goes down that doesn't report good values to the computer assumes that you have an emission problem when you likely don't. And so there's a 2012 EPA ruling that said you can disable the inducements if it's an emergency vehicle, but that's a separate part that has to be ordered, which I assume it is on most ambulances, that you order the ambulance package that removes that inducement. That's a different ambulance package.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think that sounds like it's very similar to what the EPA is now ruling and trying to push for different things. Because, of course, Bruin, when the Supreme Court Bruin decision happened, a lot of this stuff the EPA has been doing is essentially getting knocked down. But the EPA is now saying, we want to reduce inducements in our industry. A lot of guys will call them D-rates, but they want to, get rid of those because they're causing, and honestly, they're causing safety concerns. I mean, we've had drivers that, they can't get off the interstate. They can't, limp it off the road because the thing went into D-rate. Now, it does warn you and gives you a warning, but I think we need to look at it from another perspective. There could be some safety concerns what happens when you D-rate these vehicles.
Right. I think we need to do is we need to look at everything. We need to look at the safety concerns. We need to look at the environmental costs of the environmental processes, because you don't ever get something for nothing. There's an old saying that there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And if you're not willing to do the math on the trade-offs, then you may not recognize that, for example, our low-tension piston rings, which are there to reduce heat, and you know where heat comes from in the automotive world, it comes from a well in Saudi Arabia. So anything we can do to lower heat, and piston ring friction produces an enormous percentage, a much larger than you would anticipate percentage of heat. So when you put low tension rings in, you have an enormous heat savings, which means you save fuel. The problem is that the upshot of that, the trade-off, is that you now have engines that are burning a quart to 800 miles instead of my vehicle. I just checked the oil. I got 3,000 miles on it, and it's not down a half a quart yet. So, but it's a 2005, built during the golden age of vehicle manufacturing. So now Subaru says 800 miles per quart is acceptable oil consumption, even though 20 years ago, 800 mile per quart was the threshold for catalyst damage. And you do not protect the environment by damaging catalytic converters. We want to burn gas. We do not want to burn oil. And when you burn oil rather than gas, you end up with a pollutant rather than just an emission.
I think that what you're talking about, the low tension rings, is driven by the CAFE standards.
Absolutely. Which is EPA.
It's kind of like what we're seeing with engine damage. I've seen some reports that run an OW20 oil, which a lot of modern cars are running to hit CAFE standards. Actually, just by running an OW30, you can increase the lifespan of an engine by 30 to 40%, just because that oil is so thin at temperature, it's just not lubricating well.
Well, and this is a cultural problem, because what we need to do as individuals is we need to take ownership. If you're a shop owner, you need to take ownership of what you're advising your customers to do. If you're a human, you need to take ownership of your own health. If you're a parent, you need to take ownership of your child's education, because the culture, the universe, it's always been this way. The universe is not your friend. You have to take charge of your own life, which means even though the OEM recommends OW20, you need to do your homework and find out, no, that's bad for your engine. And the OEM isn't particularly disappointed with the OW20. I mean, that million engine recall for GM was a bit painful for them, and it certainly didn't help their reputation. But when your vehicle, like back in, let's say, 96 to 06, you couldn't buy a bad vehicle. I mean, everything, if you took good care of it, was lasting 300,000 miles. The old Buick LeSabre 3800s, the Crown Vics, the F-150s, the Silverados, everything was well.
Well, I mean, a lot of that's true, but I think that what you just said brings up a really good point. I want to go down this path, and that is owners looking out not only for their best interest, but the customers. And one thing, and this is what I teach my children, anytime someone tells you something, you need to understand their why. What is their motivation, right? You look at politicians, what is their motivation? You look at business owners, what is their motivation? You look at a manufacturer, what is their motivation? Does GM want us to have cars that last 300,000 miles? No, GM wants us to buy a car every 2 to 3 years. It's obvious in the way that they've done their marketing and their cycling. And for us as business owners, this is what the point I want to get to is I think we need to do a better job of advising with facts and not feelings. I grew up in a very rural farming community. And
Right.
I always say when people tell me something, I ask them, is this farmer wisdom or is this facts? Because there's a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lot of things out there in the world. And I'm a type of guy that I geek out on data. Like, here's a perfect example. I would have guys come in and they would say, I have to have this brand of oil. Why? Well, it's the best. What does that mean? I was salesman. I love salesmen. I'd love to mess with salesmen some days. You'd have a salesman come into your shop and try to sell you the latest thing, oh, you need to sell this oil. It's the best. I would always mess with them, and I'd walk out to the door and look out the window, and they'd be like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm looking for the Ferrari. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you heard toting that we have to have the best of the best. That's what we should be selling. I said, why aren't you driving a Ferrari? We could all agree it's a better car, but why aren't you driving it? He said, well, I can't afford a Ferrari. I said, you know what? And my guys can't afford an oil that's 10x the price. It was usually someone like Farm Service or John Deere because they all have their own oils. But so what I started doing was I took every single oil I could get my hands on and I sent it to a lab. And yes, it cost me $20 an oil to get it sampled. But what I found out was amazing, and that was that if you go to a distributor and buy their house brand oil, which, by the way, if people listening don't understand this, oil is done to a standard. It's called API, right? The American Petroleum Institute standards. So this stuff isn't snake oil. There's nothing magic about it. It's like when you go to the gas station and buy a bottle of water. Yes, that water is 99.99% all the same in every bottle of water. Where it came from, yes, I agree, it's different. But is it really different? And that's kind of where oils are. And so what we found out was we could test the top of the line AMS oil. As long as that met the API standard, we could take the full synthetic house brand. And those oils were so close to each other under a lab test when we're looking at parts per millions of additives that you couldn't tell the difference between the two. So much so I didn't believe it. So I sent it to 2 other independent labs. And the difference between the lab testing, in other words, so the difference of variant between labs was a bigger variant than the variant between the 2 oils. It was absolutely mind-blowing. What you find out when you actually start making decisions based on facts.
Absolutely. As a trainer, because I not only have had my own shop, I've had a training career for the last 15 years. And the 2 classes I usually get the best reviews on are the Train the Trainer class, where I'm training guys how to be a trainer, and then the critical thinking skills class. And what you just described is the difference between objectivity and subjectivity. Objectivity says, oh, the temperature in the room just went up by 4 degrees. Subjectivity says, yeah, it's a little warm in here, or it's a little chilly in here. It's an opinion. It's not a fact. And there's nothing wrong with opinions. Opinions are extremely important. When I tell you that 96 to 06 is the golden age of automobile manufacturing, I can give you reasons for it, but I still recognize it's an opinion. And what we need to do is to look at that objective reality and not just determine that we're going to feel good about ourselves.
And I think that's what people need to look at is that you can use your intuitions, and those are awesome because it's kind of like when you walk in the room and you say something that doesn't smell right, right? So that's an opinion because we haven't found the source. So we should learn to use those instincts to go investigate further. And that's the problem. So here's another example that I've been making some what you would call reaction videos or observation videos from posts. And most of it's around things that I think are unsafe. Like perfect example, mounting a tire while it's still on the truck. Yes, we've seen it done. Is it the right way to do it? No, it's not. So I make a reaction video saying why it's not okay to mount a tire in a vertical position on a truck and then set the bead with ether. Like, I think the ether part we all agree is dangerous and sketchy. And can we get by with it? Yes. But then it's amazing reading these comment videos, these comments to all these people out there. One guy's like, oh, you should look at his hands. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's not a mechanic. I could crush you with my qualifications, right? Like I got a stack of qualifications. Just because I don't have dirty hands today doesn't mean that. And then another guy's like, well, there's nothing wrong with doing that. And it's just amazing how many guys have this opinion that because I've been doing it for years that way, it's okay. And I think as technicians, and especially business owners, we all need to take a step back and constantly evaluate what we're doing and realize it's kind of like science. When I went to school, and probably when you went to school, Pluto was a planet. Now it's not a planet anymore. Why? Because we have scientific and we have research that shows, it's really not. And it's kind of like the way we do things. Are we really doing things the best way? Do we go to work every day saying, can I optimize that just a little bit more? Is there a better way? And sometimes the better way isn't better because it's faster or cheaper. It's better because it's safer. Like using ether. Is it faster to use ether than it is to go find the cheetah and air it up and use it 4 or 5 times? Because sometimes you got to use it more than once, right? No, it's not. But it's not worth it. Like the dangers, the things that we do, sometimes we need to look at that and go, is this really the right way we should be doing it? And it's the same way as business owners. When you were a 2-employee shop, you could take a lot of liberties and take shortcuts and get by with it because you had 30 years of experience and you knew you could get by with cutting some corners. The problem with that is now when you hire an 18-year-old kid that doesn't know what he's doing and he doesn't know all the things that you know, he doesn't have 30 years of experience. And so he takes a shortcut and gets a bad outcome. Right. And I asked owners, I said, well, whose fault's that? And the example I give, if you run a shop and you have a problem with wheels falling off and you don't have a policy that says every lug nut gets torqued with a torque wrench,
right?
Whose fault really is it the tires are falling off? Is it really because you have crappy technicians, or are you just a crappy business owner that never bothered to take the time to document things and do it the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. As a trainer, we have this mission statement on the first slide, and it's full of buzzwords, and I just can't stand buzzwords. But there's one phrase I really like. When I do a brake class, I always bring up the fact that most guys in the room learned how to do brakes from a guy who learned how to do brakes from a guy who learned how to do brakes from a guy that found out how to do brakes on a Model T. And that is the transition of information generation to generation. Well, we got a new buzzword. And even though I hate buzzwords, here's the one I like. It's called best practices. Now, based on what you said, one of the things you need to understand about best practices is that they are a consensus standard. That means everybody, regardless of where you're from, there is a vast majority consensus that this is the right way to do it. Does that mean it's absolute truth? No, it doesn't, because absolute truth is a religious statement. If you want absolute truth, go to church on Sunday, but it doesn't belong in our industry because we are not omniscient. We learn things every day, and best practices will be revised over time as the industry learns more. So having this mindset where you avoid the absolutism that my way is right, your way is wrong, I'm right because I'm right, and you're wrong because you're wrong, doesn't cut it anymore. We need, well, you talk about wheel torque. We don't have I can't remember the last time we ever had a wheel fall off because we have two things. Not only do we torque everything with a torque wrench, but we have the customer come back in 50 to 100 miles and we do a retorque. Like if we send a private vehicle out for after doing something that had the tires off, then we put the wheel covers on the floor on the passenger side. They do not get put on the vehicle as a reminder that he has to come back. We put them on in 50 or 100 miles. When he comes back, we do the retorque, we put the wheel covers back on. And it provides, to use EPA terminology, an inducement for the guy to come back and get the wheels retorqued. And because to me, the rear dualies are the ones that are 90% of your wheel failures. If you're losing a tire on a single wheel vehicle, there's something seriously wrong.
I was just going to bring that up. I have actually, and this is an observation, I don't have any empirical data to back it up. I used to work on a fleet. We had 34 Dodge Ram pickups. They were all 3500s. And we had a real problem with wheels falling off. And I got accused of a lot of things. And so we did some research and found out the wheels were actually falling off, but only after they went to the tire shop and got new tires put on. And then we went and researched it and found out it wasn't because they were under-torqued. It was because they were over-torqued. Right. They were over-torqued so much. And, people don't understand that the lug nut on those dualies is like 140 foot-pounds as a standard. But these guys, because it's a big truck, were out there ugga-dugging it all day long, and then they'd take a torque wrench and go click. Oh, okay, it's torqued. Yeah. But that's the problem. I mean, how many people actually understand that if you take a torque wrench to a wheel and it clicks, we don't know how tight it is. We just know it's at least that. It could be 1,000 foot-pounds. We don't know. And that's a danger, right? You stretch those wheel studs, they break, they fall off. And so back to what I was getting at with standards is we need to understand how things work. And this is one of the problems I have with people that don't have technical training and that have not gone to a trade school. Because most human beings, I'm making a general statement out there, become a professional at something, they think they're an expert, and then they just stop learning. And they don't realize that I didn't go to school. I didn't do a week in engines class about how fasteners work and how they actually stretch as they get torqued. And that like anything, you only have so many stretches and it breaks. How many people actually measure wheel studs when they do a wheel off? Like, I don't think I have ever seen a technician measure a wheel stud during a wheel off to see if, the stud is too small. They just don't do it. Even though the gauges exist, I had them in my own shop. You almost couldn't get anybody to use them.
Yeah, I did a class last week. Actually, did the same class twice. The average experience of the students in the class was some plus 20 years, and it was a developing a diagnostic game plan class. But what I ended up doing was I got through almost no slides. The way this class is set up is there's way more information than you can possibly cover in an 8-hour class. It's an 8-hour during the day class and way too much information. So what I do is I interview the class members at first, find out what they need, and then I start covering just a review of basic principles. And for these two classes, I got very little beyond the review of basic principles because we talk about electricity, we talk about fuel control, we talk about HVAC, and because those are the big three when it comes to diagnostic dilemmas, where you really need to know the basic principles in order to understand them. And I spent most of my time not using the slides, but using the whiteboard, describing what a volt is, what an amp is, what how they, what Ohm's law means. I mean, if you ask them what does Ohm's law mean, it's got something to do with electricity. It's the relationship between ohms, volts, and amps in a electric circuit with a resistive load. Motors don't follow Ohm's law. And when you tell them that, they're like, you just grew a second head.
Well, it's like trying to convince a guy that corrosion is actually, it affects the circuit more on a 12-volt starter circuit. 1 ohm of resistance on that actually affects it more than 1 ohm of resistance on a 5-volt reference. And they're like,
oh, absolutely.
Well, that doesn't make sense. And I'm like, it makes sense if you understand math. And a lot of things that we do are science and math. It's like, I used to tell people, working on cars and trucks a lot of times is just simple physics, right? If you understand how physics work and you understand levers and you understand inclined planes, which is a screw, you understand all these things. But so many guys lack that basic knowledge that we need. And that's the thing about this industry that really does bug me. And that's that you need a license in almost every state of America to cut hair, but you don't need and that grows back, by the way. But yet you don't need a license to work on an emergency vehicle or a $500,000 truck. Everybody and their brother can say, I'm a mechanic. And, the qualification in the United States to work on brakes is insane. Oh, I worked in a shop for a year, so I'm competent. That's it. That's our qualification. It's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy, except that this started out 120 years ago when you had guys on the farm like me. This is me. I'm describing myself here, that I'm number 2 of 7 kids, and the other 6 were all raised animals and showed their pet animals at the county fair, but I wanted to work on the equipment. I've known from the time I was 10 years old that I wanted to work in a shop. And back 120 years ago, we ended up with a section of the population that had mechanical aptitude, and they started figuring out how a Model T works or how a Model A works or how a 39 Pontiac works. And they started working on them. They had aptitude, and they became mechanics, and they became car guys. I like the phrase car guys. Car guys are the guys that work on vehicles during the day, and then at night they help their buddy with either their race car or their show car, and either race them or show them on the weekend. That's what they do. These are car guys. I think I probably mentioned to you before, I don't know of a single plumber that has a spare toilet in his garage that he covers with chrome and flames. It's a completely different technical career. And being
I
an
love that
automotive
analogy. I might have to steal that because you're absolutely right. If you think about the mindset of a technician, they go home and tinker with stuff even more. And yet a lot of trades don't do that. I don't know any carpenters that go home and do woodworking in their basement at night because they love woodworking so much. But almost every mechanic I know either does work on the side or they're going home and tinkering with their own stuff.
Right. And plus you had the added complication that in the automotive industry, I have a buddy who's an electrician. That's all he works on. I have a buddy who's an HVAC guy. That's all he works on. I have a buddy, he sits at a desk and works on computers. In the automotive industry, we have all 3 of those: electricity, HVAC, computers. Plus we have brake friction, fuel chemistry, exhaust system, cleaning the exhaust byproducts. I mean, there is so much you need to know. This is the most challenging career on the planet. And one of the problems that we're seeing right now is we have a great divergence, and that is as the technology is going up, the competence of our high school graduates is going down. First of all, they weren't raised with mini bikes and go-karts and lawnmowers. They were raised with screens. I have one guy who works for me right now. He's a really good guy, but he started out after graduated from high school. I was his first full-time job after high school, and he doesn't know the difference between a noun and a verb. He never memorizes multiplication tables. If you asked him what the simple machines are, he'd never heard that phrase before. You just brought it up a second ago yourself, the inclined plane, the wheel and pulley, the lever. He never heard of it. He graduated from high school, and these are all things that I learned in school in 4th grade or 5th grade,
Right.
Things like that. And through high school, he never learned them. So we have this dramatic increase in technological complexity. At the same time, is we have students that are given participation trophies and safe spaces, and we're making a whole generation of people fragile when what we need are people that can do the difficult things that are involved with fixing automobiles.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's kind of my lesson or my words to owners out there are when you struggle with an employee and they have poor performance, get back to the basics. And it's the same way with your business. When you're trying to diagnose your business, you don't understand why you're not making money. Let's get back to the basics. Because I could pretty much diagnose any business with about 5 numbers, and I can figure out where we need to go look. And of course, that's my, does it smell bad kind of thing. And we have to dive in deep. But my point to that is if you're really struggling with an employee, 2 things. Number one, you got to look at your hiring practices because you need to establish what the minimum intelligent level you need to perform this job successfully. And that level has to be based on your system. And the one thing I remind people is Walmart does over 35,000 oil changes a year or a day. I'm not saying Walmart's the best oil change shop in town, but they don't mess up 35,000 a day. And so we need to understand that the reason why that works is because they have built a system that is almost impossible to fail at. And as business owners, we have to take responsibility that if our business is not doing good, it's our fault.
Absolutely. Well, I get people my age or even younger now, because I'm no spring chicken myself, that complain about younger generations. And I tell them what you need to use the oldest tool ever invented by mankind. You know what that tool is?
Your brain.
No. That's what uses the tools. Originally, it was a puddle because you could look and you could see yourself in the puddle. Now we call it a mirror. Look in the mirror and ask who raised these younger generations. It's not their fault. They were kids. They don't know anything. They were raised by ideologues that hold to this ideology that safety and protection is the most important thing. Well, no, it isn't. And they're actually moving into the video game field because they need that rush of difficulty and competition and things like that we completely removed from every other part of their existence. And it's a disaster. But back to the original thing, the hiring practices, we need to develop a hiring interview practice that identifies character above expertise.
Yes.
And even above intelligence.
And this is actually something that it was pretty amazing. So I interviewed, his name is Joe Gallagher, and he brought up the exact point, and I love the way he phrased it. If we fire for attitude and behavior, why do we not hire for attitude and behavior?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think we've got this all wrong. I've said this for years. I hire for attitude and aptitude because I am confident in myself that I can teach anyone with the right attitude and the right aptitude to be a technician.
Absolutely.
And even some that don't have the right the aptitude, I can get somewhere with them. But here's what I can't do. I can't teach you to have a good personality. I used to say the same thing when I owned a limo company. I could teach anybody to drive a bus. I cannot teach you to have a good personality. And so as owners, I think we do ourselves a disservice because most of us in this industry hire out of desperation. Oh, I can't find a good mechanic. I can't find a good guy. So I hire the first guy who walks in the door that has the technical skills I need. The problem we don't ask ourselves is what did that just do to our environment? Because every time you add something or subtract something to an environment, it changes. And the environment we're talking about is the culture of your shop. And then these owners wake up 4 or 5 years later and they can't understand why their shop's a dumpster fire. And it's like, because that's what you created. People have to understand you have a culture, whether it's by accident or whether it's on purpose. You just got to ask yourself, which one do I have? Do I have an accidental culture, or did I purposely create this culture? And it really does start back with ownership. Like, I talk to so many owners and they're like, I can't hire a good tech. And I look them right in the eye. I say, why would anybody want to work for you? It blows my mind how many people have never thought of it that way. And I
Right.
ask them, I'm like, your shop is dirty. It's disorganized. You're dirty. You're disorganized. Why would anybody want to work for you? The only guys that want to work for you are people that are dirty and disorganized. And then you wonder why your shop is dirty and disorganized, because that's
Right.
what you're attracting. I mean,
Yes.
I tell owners all the time, you want to know what the most powerful thing I told an owner to do one time and it worked? I told him, tomorrow come to work in khakis. And he said, why? I said, just do it. Let's talk tomorrow. And he did it. And he said, yeah, I did it. I said, good. We're going to talk next week. And we talked next week. And I said, what changed? He says, it's absolutely amazing how I changed my brain just by wearing khakis to work. He said, because every time I went out in the bay and I ruined a pair of pants, he said, I got to Wednesday and I realized I can't ruin any more pants. So he stayed out of the bay and he actually focused on the thing he needed to focus on, which is actually running a business. And he stopped trying to fix trucks and he started to fix his business. And it was amazing. It only took wearing a different pair of pants to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, the three things that you need to address is, who are your techs, who are your customers, and who are you? Because one of the things that I've done in the hiring phase is, for probably 15 years, I always have a standard line. I'm a trainer. I can train you to do anything, but I can't raise you. I need your parents to have done that. But those days are gone. You can't expect that anymore. You have to be prepared to raise your technicians, which means hiring a technician with technical expertise might be completely off the table. You start new and you get a guy who's got he's still going to have bad habits because of a lot of other reasons, but you can train people to be technicians without developing the bad technician habits that they get either working at a flat rate dealership shop or a dirty, like you just described, a dirty shop that doesn't take care of things. The last guy I hired, I never even did an in-person interview before I hired him over the phone. He was recommended to me very surreptitiously by one of the tool dealers. So the first call I made was to his boss, because I know him. It's a small town. And I said, this is what happened. I didn't share how I heard this or anything else, but I just heard that one of your guys isn't happy. And is it okay if I talk to him? And he said, sure. Yeah, absolutely. If he's not happy, because he's talking about getting out of the industry. And what the tool dealer told me was, I think you need him and I think he needs you.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. I really appreciate, all the insight you've given. Kevin, we've had a really great conversation about, really honestly, it's more about how to change you as an owner.
Absolutely.
Changing your mindset to understand that, people have to understand that the best time to plant a tree was 5 years ago. The second best time is today.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that we have to grow our own technicians. Like, the idea that we're just going to pluck them off a tree and they're ready to eat like a piece of fruit, that's a fallacy. It doesn't exist unless you planted that tree.
Yep. So, yeah, let's do this again sometime.
We should.